Well, a very good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Cabaret Lounge, part of our Enrichment at Sea lecture program here. We've got some fantastic lectures on board on this wonderful cruise. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, we have our master photographer, master cinematographer, and journalist. Please put your hands together for Steve Noble.
Welcome, everybody. So good to see you all here. How many people here are here for 64 days? Oh my God, congratulations. That's absolutely fantastic. I'm going to start by giving you a little bit of information about how and why I became a photographer. In my youth, I was an adventure seeker. And I was fascinated by ancient cultures and civilizations. I dreamed of exploring exotic places like Machu Picchu in Peru and the Great Pyramids of Egypt. But I didn't have much money, and so the likelihood of doing those things was rather remote. And so I would go to the Sierra Mountains and I would go hiking and exploring. Now, most of my friends and family, they didn't really share the same enthusiasm that I had for the outdoors. And so when I would go into the outdoors, I would commonly do it alone. So I'd either be backpacking or hiking, but more often than not, I was backpacking in the wilderness. And I would get out there and I would explore. And I would find high mountain lakes and I'd go swimming. I'd find waterfalls. I would sit and I would just observe wildlife. And for me, being a teenager at the time, it was all just a grand adventure. As evening would begin to come, I would watch as the colors in the sky would begin to change. And they would go from that bright blue of daylight into kind of the pinks, and the sunset would begin to happen. And I would marvel at those color changes. I would build a roaring campfire, and I'd sit by that campfire. And being alone in the wilderness, it was a very quiet experience, and you have a lot of time to think. And one of the thoughts that I had was how many hundreds of generations of my ancestors and your ancestors sat by a similar campfire and gazed into those flames, and how many stories and mythology and ideas came from those moments. So I'd be watching the fire and the logs burning and hearing the crackling of the wood and watching the red and the yellow and the gold flames dancing around. And it seemed to me that it's somewhat embedded in our genetic code, our predisposition to enjoying these campfires. The sun would begin to set, and the blue sky would turn to a gray, and then that gray sky would turn into a black sky. I was probably at least 100 miles away from the very nearest light source. And so that black sky, I want you to envision it, was a completely black sky. I mean, a pitch black sky. And I would lay down in my sleeping bag and I'd look up at the heavens, and the sky would just be filled with stars. I mean, it was a magnificent sight. And more often than not, I would see these meteor showers. And so nature would put on this marvelous show for me. And every once in a while, you've all seen this, I'm sure, a little satellite begins to pass by in the night. And so that's how I would go to sleep every night. It was quite an interesting experience. The next morning, I usually would get up about an hour before sunrise. And this is a very magical time. It's a time that few people really experience, but I want you to try it if you can. I would bundle myself up, get all warm, go out away from camp, and I would just sit down near a vista and I would wait and I would observe. And what I would see is that the earth was asleep. Everything was dark, everything was quiet. And I would slowly watch as that pitch black sky turned to somewhat of a gray sky, the stars would disappear, and the sun would begin to rise. And so those colors on the horizon would begin to come. Somewhere off in the distance, I would hear some birds chirping. And what was happening was the earth was literally coming alive around me. And it was really just a marvelous, marvelous experience. So I'd get home, I'd be all excited, and I'd want to get with my friends and family and tell them all these wonderful experiences that I had and the things that I had seen. And what I found was that my words completely and utterly failed to convey the emotion, the power, the impact of what I had experienced. And so I thought, how am I going to solve this problem? And one idea I had was, well, I'm going to take a camera with me. So I bought my first camera, take it into the wilderness with me. And today, I'm sure everyone here has a camera that is incredibly sophisticated, incredibly powerful. But a camera is just a tool. And how well you know that tool will depend on the output of what your image is. And so what does a camera do ultimately? It just takes a photograph. Most of us put it on A for auto, press that button, boom, we've got a photo, and it generally does a pretty good job. But what that photo is, think about it, is it's an immortalization of a fraction of a second in time, captured. And our skill as photographers is taking that image and knowing how to set our camera so that we capture that image. Moments in time, fractions of a second, captured in a photo. And what we're going to do over the course of the next 64 days, or however long you're on the ship, is to improve our skills collectively. We will all learn from these talks. I want you to share the photos that you take. I will share with you the photos that I take. We will learn about HDR photography and panoramic photography and time-lapse photography and composition and what is shutters and apertures and all those crazy things. And we will learn what you want to learn. So we will talk about that momentarily. Now, how many of you here have seen a movie called It's a Wonderful Life? Okay, good. You've not ever seen it? Oh my gosh. Okay. It's a Wonderful Life. It's my favorite movie. And it's about this poor guy, played by Jimmy Stewart. His name is George Bailey. And he is in Bedford Falls. And he's a dreamer. But he's saddled with the responsibility of operating the old building and loan. But he dreams of seeing the world. He dreams of seeing the Greece and the Athens and the Parthenon and the Colosseum. And this is what his gut is telling him he wants to do. Poor George never gets an opportunity to actually fulfill those dreams, but his life is still wonderful nonetheless. I was very fortunate in my early 20s to be able to go to Africa. And my first stop in Africa was my first, but one of my stops in Africa was a place called Zimbabwe. And I managed to make my way to a unique area called Victoria Falls. Anyone been to Victoria Falls? Oh, fantastic. You have been to one of the most amazing places on planet Earth, no doubt. If you haven't been there, put that on your list. And so I was standing at Victoria Falls, and I was in awe. I just could not believe what I was seeing. There in the midst of the jungle, greenery everywhere around me, was this magnificent waterfall cascading the Zambezi River, flowing off into this huge crevasse, and the spray from the falls rises hundreds of feet into the air, 365 days a year. So it's basically raining all the time in certain areas. It is just a marvelous sight. And that moment in my early 20s is the moment that shaped who I am today. It was that moment that I realized that what I wanted to do in my life was to find the beauty on planet Earth, capture that beauty, and share that beauty with others through photography. So, fast forward now to a few years back. My wife and I are at the south rim of the Grand Canyon, And something happened on this trip that affected me deeply. And what I saw was a young couple from China. They had just gotten off a bus, and they were walking toward the South Rim. And so they're getting closer to seeing that magnificent panorama. And they look out, and I'm watching this drama unfold. And what happens is, in harmony, both of them at the same time, their jaws drop open. No words are spoken. This primeval, guttural gasp escapes their lips. This, tears are welling in their eyes. And they're just overcome by the majesty of that moment. And yes, they had looked at hundreds of pictures of the Grand Canyon, probably seen movies. But nothing could prepare them for that moment in which the imagination that they had turned into reality. And so I was watching this drama and trying to think, well, why is this affecting me so much? And I then got it. I realized what was happening. What was happening was that was the emotion that I had. That was the feeling that I had 38 years ago when I visited Victoria Falls for the first time. 2014, I'm sitting at home. I'm watching a documentary on the Great Wall of China. And as my mind usually does, I have a good imagination, I begin to daydream about different things, and I'm visioning myself standing on the Great Wall of China, and I'm walking around and I'm taking some photographs and exploring a bit. And as this daydream is unfolding, I'm thinking, why not, since I'm in China on this imaginary trip, let's go over to the pyramids and check that out. And if I'm in North Africa, let's go south a little bit. Let's go do a couple safaris in Africa. And why not? Well, let's cross the Atlantic and go over to Machu Picchu and so forth and so on. So this imagination, I realized at that moment, this was my bucket list. These are places that either I've been to and I wanted to go back to, or places that I hadn't been to that I desperately wanted to see. And then the thought occurred to me, why not just do it? Why not just do it? Why not turn that imagination into a reality? And so the process began 1 year ago, not from today, but from January of 2015, I left on a trip that would circumnavigate planet Earth and take me to 17 different countries on 4 different continents to find the wonders of the world. And when I was all done, I realized that my trip around the world was an 80-day trip. So yes, I went around the world in 80 days, and it was kind of by chance, but nonetheless interesting. So my first stop was Machu Picchu, and this mountain in back of Machu Picchu right here is called Huayna Picchu. Many of you who, you may see this, or you might have already seen this in other trips, but Huayna Picchu is a marvelous granite spire that rises from the mountains here, and it's a very steep climb. I won't be kidding you there. But I made it to the top of Huayna Picchu. This was a goal that I had. And sitting at the top of Huayna Picchu, you are at the top of the world at least in this environment. And as you can see from this photo, and of course in my experience when I was there, you almost feel like Zeus or something. You are sitting up there, and the clouds are below you. And I mean, a blanket of clouds are below you, and you're sitting above this and watching this. A rather amazing experience. From Peru, I went to the border of Argentina and Brazil to a place called Iguazu Falls. How many people have been to Iguazu? Excellent, excellent. One of the most beautiful falls on the planet. Hard to say which is more beautiful, certainly a personal opinion, between Iguazu Falls and Victoria Falls. I do have an opinion though. Yeah, there's me. Always a good idea to include yourself. I mean, you can take many beautiful photos, but as you look back on your life, as you get to a certain point, and you see this beautiful image of Iguazu Falls, it's okay. But you're going to want to see yourself or your loved ones in those shots as well. I'll remember how young I used to be. This is in Brazil. This is a place called Salvador, Brazil. Anyone have an idea how I took this shot? What's it? Yeah, there you go. I traveled the world with a drone. This was exciting. For a photographer, this was a new wrinkle.